shot, and when he sat up, he saw his friends bleeding out, so he drove to the hospital, which was conveniently right around the corner. After this report, the detectives and officers shut down the crime scene and walked 12 blocks on foot. Not a single report of gunshots, nor evidence of a shooting was found. Portland was tested for gunshot residue on his hands but came back negative. The roommate, Dontavius Withers, of Sack Chaser and Juvie, was questioned by the police since he lived at their last known address. He said there were 2 cars when they left the studio, a gray Jeep, which is where the murder took place in, and a red Mitsubishi, which Withers said that he and Melly were in. He said he went straight home and found out later that his roommates were dead and didn't know where Melly was. But it was later proven that Withers lied about the situation. Before police showed up, he was with Melly at Fredo Bang's house. Withers changed his story and said that Melly was in the Jeep when they left the studio, but then got into the Mitsubishi around Sheridan Ave when Withers Snapchatted him to pick him up. Police obtained security footage from the manager of the recording studio which proved Melly left in the gray Jeep. He got into the back left seat. Remember, victims were in the front right and back right seats. Cell phone records show that Withers went straight home without stopping, so Melly never entered the Mitsubishi. When police investigated the Jeep, they found one .40 caliber shell casing on the floorboards where Melly was sitting. It was inside a white plastic bag. If this was a drive-by, there would not be shell casings inside of the car. This supports evidence that shots occurred from inside of the car. Police were able to obtain T-Mobile cell phone records that track their locations minute by minute. These records show that Melly, Portland, Sack, and Juvie were all in the car together at the time of the murder. They did confirm that the Jeep exited on Miramar Parkway, but turned north on Southwest 184th and then west on Pines Boulevard at 353, and then turned back east at 406. This is enough time to make it all the way to the outskirts of the city where nothing is around, and back. The cell phone records also show that they were driving around the area west of I-75 before arriving to the hospital at 4:35. Melly's cell phone was separated from the car at 4:32, just 3 minutes before the Jeep arrived to the hospital. This is where people are assuming that Melly and Portland were trying to get their story straight, driving around the city, and then ultimately Melly hopped out before Portland took them to the hospital. Melly then FaceTimed his girlfriend saying that they were a victim of a drive-by and he needed to be picked up, which confirms that he was at the scene of the crime. So police knew that there were a lot of conflicting statements from witnesses, and even some straight-up lies. They needed to conduct this investigation immediately. The next day when the news broke, YNW Melly took to Instagram and Facebook to grieve publicly, claiming that "they took my brothers from me over jealousy." Melly proceeded with his career as usual. He released a documentary on his YouTube channel on December 4th, which featured Sack Chaser and Juvie, and a little bit about how close they were growing up. It also featured a section about how obsessed with guns Melly was. At the end of the documentary, it stated that 4 days after the completion of this film, YNW Melly and his friends were a target of a drive-by shooting. Then the Genius video dropped of Melly explaining the lyrics to his hit song Murder on My Mind, where he describes his love for guns and says he isn't a human murderer.
A murderer. I murdered a and I murdered a bee. I am not no human murderer.
But on January 3rd, 2019, he was arrested in Florida on weed charges. His sinister smiling mugshot went viral. Just 3 weeks later, while he was still locked up, Mixed Personalities dropped with a Lyrical Lemonade video. This was a huge moment for Melly and Cole Bennett, as Kanye was the first veteran superstar rapper he had worked with at that point. The song went mega viral, and Melly's fame exploded. This was the first time a lot of people have heard of him. He was about to become a mainstream artist, but on February 13th, just less than a month later, the investigation concluded, and a warrant for his arrest for the murder of his 2 friends was now official. He immediately turned himself in despite claiming his innocence. 2 weeks later, the evidence against Melly was released. Police discovered that YNW Portland lied about where the crime actually took place. The police used a canine to investigate the crime scene on Southwest 160th Street, which is where he reported the drive-by happened, but the dog found nothing. Officers then investigated a more rural area that they thought maybe was the crime scene, and the canine found some evidence. The dog discovered 8 .40 caliber shell casings and 2 types of glass that matched the front passenger and rear passenger window of the Jeep. So now they know the crime scene is not even close to where it was reported. This prompted them to investigate the vehicle again, and they decided to do a trajectory analysis using rods and strings to determine flight paths of projectiles. And they confirmed that there is no way this could have been a drive-by shooting based on the bullet paths and the wounds suffered by the victims. The police suspect that they parked the vehicle and staged a drive-by shooting before showing up to the hospital. When autopsy reports came back regarding the victim's wounds, the evidence shows the initial lethal shot occurred from inside the vehicle and was initiated from the left rear passenger side, the same position occupied by Demons, which is Melly. An intermediate wound by definition would indicate a distance of 3 inches to 3 feet between the victim and the weapon. However, due to a 3 centimeter stippling pattern, the weapon was in a close proximity to Thomas's head. This would be a straight up execution style shot. The gunshot wounds to the back of Thomas also indicates these wounds were inflicted after he was shot in the head, as the projectiles entered Thomas's back when he was leaning to the left. Evidence from the autopsy revealed that both victims' wound paths to their heads were from a left to right direction. This direction contradicts the statements made by Henry and does not support the statements of a drive-by shooting that occurred on the right side of the vehicle. Basically, they think Melly shot both of his friends point blank. Then they drove around trying to come up with a story, then staged a drive-by to make it look more convincing.
Take it nowhere.